let's talk about arguments for the existence of God today. The three key concepts to think about when you're thinking about the big three arguments are these. For cosmological arguments, you're thinking fundamentally of the question, why is there something rather than nothing? For teleological arguments, you're thinking, why are things so beautifully engineered in the universe? In some way or another, the universe is a magnificent engineering feat. For the ontological argument, the philosopher's invention, we can call it, the central idea is the idea of a maximally perfect, greatest possible being. So, three ideas, something rather than nothing, magnificent engineering, and maximally perfect, maximally great being. So let's start with the engineering feat, the teleological argument. The teleological argument has two major periods to its history. There is the teleological argument prior to Darwin, and there is the teleological argument or teleological arguments post-Darwin. Why is Darwin so important? The reason is, before Darwin, it looked like you had two choices if you want to explain the magnificent engineering of the universe or particular parts of it. One explanation was chance. The other is creator. Post-Darwin, we get a third possibility. Darwin's great contribution was the idea of evolution. You don't need just chance to explain some of the things that happen in the world, and you don't need special creation of a certain sort either. What you get are some things developing from, arising out of other things. That's evolution. And Darwin proposed the idea that survival of the fittest is what drives this process. All right, once you've got evolution in the picture, you don't have just God and chance as your possible explanations. You have God, you have evolution, and you have chance. And so William Paley's arguments about the wonderful intricacies of the human eye, and you compare those with a watch, cease to be compelling arguments anymore. Maybe they were right, maybe the conclusion was correct, but the premises were no longer motivated in the way that they were, because central to Paley's argument was the idea you have two choices. You get God or chance. Which one are you going to go with? Chance just looks like you're punting. You're not really trying very hard to explain it. You're just throwing up your hands and saying, well, things happen. We can't explain them, but we don't need to, or we don't have to, or something along those lines. Post-Darwin, you don't need to say that. You say, well, look, we don't know the details of how this works, but this is nothing more than evolution at work. That's what happens. Things arise that are much, much more complicated and interesting than what they came from, in much the same way as finding great athletes at the Olympics doesn't surprise you. Why is it that there's so many great athletes at the Olympics? Well, there's a selection process. You don't get to go if you're not gifted along certain dimensions. And just so with things that we find in the universe. In our present universe, we find lots of things that are incredible engineering feats. How did they get here? Well, they were selected for. That's the story, the Darwinian story. So post-Darwin, the teleological argument has to be recast if it's not going to be jettisoned altogether. And it has been. The most recent versions of the teleological argument are called fine-tuning arguments, and they focus on the central explanatory role of certain fundamental constants about our universe. Constants that, if they were slightly different, had slightly different values than they in fact have, the universe would have been impossible. So you get strong and weak nuclear forces, you get the gravitational force itself. For example, take a magnet and attach it to your fridge. Just a standard rare earth magnet. There's a certain force that exerts. It turns out if the gravitational attraction had the same force as the magnetic force, the universe could never have existed because objects would have been pulled back toward each other by this much increased gravitational force, and so the universe would never have arisen. So the idea is this: there are these values that these fundamental constants have. They're incredibly fine-tuned, so in some sense, it's a lucky accident that the universe exists and that we're here to observe it. Well, we are here to observe it, so what are you supposed to infer from this? The fact that we're here to observe it is supposed to count as evidence for the fine-tuning of the fundamental constants. Okay, that's fine. What explains this fine-tuning? Well, one explanation of this fine-tuning is the existence of God. Now, what else could explain it? Well, obviously, chance could. It just happened that way. But now we're back pre-Darwin. It's either God or chance. So what can you say that would be an analog of Darwin's idea that evolution is a third possibility? Well, you can't cite evolution itself directly in an account of the fine-tuning of the fundamental constants, because that's a metaphysical fact about the universe, and evolution itself functions within the universe once the universe is off and running. So it's not like Darwin gives some special response in terms of selection for the fine-tuning of the constants. That explanation isn't going to get off the ground. What you need is something else by way of explanation. Well, there are possibilities. One possibility is this is the existence of the universe, and the fine-tuning of the constants is not the sort of thing that we should be looking for an explanation for. We'll come back to that later. Here's a different possibility. It's called the many universes hypothesis. Perhaps there are many universes all existing all at the same time or something like that. It's hard to talk about times when you're referring to the many worlds hypothesis or the many universes hypothesis, because it's not clear that time is a metric that can apply across worlds. Maybe times, like spaces, are intra-universe features. So if I talk about all of them existing at the same time, maybe that's just a metaphysical confusion. But maybe it's just also, maybe it's best to take it as a metaphor to help us grasp the idea, even if it can't literally be true. In order to address that question, we'd have to think more deeply about the philosophy of time, and that's not what we're going to do here. So we're going to muddle through using a metaphor about the many worlds hypothesis, and let's just see where it takes us. So maybe all these worlds exist all at once. That's somewhat akin to David Lewis's view, modal realism, on which all possible worlds are equally real. Don't be surprised to find special features about that world. After all, any set of possible features will be realized somewhere. So there's going to be some unique ones here. Okay, you can do that. There's also the sequential many worlds hypothesis, which is universes come and go. let's suppose for the moment that they all originate from some big bang and the universe expands very fast from that, and then finally things get to the point where you start getting contraction and the universe goes back to its original starting point, and then the process starts all over. Suppose that's the story. And then we find ourselves in the middle of one of these nodes that involves expansion and contraction, and we notice fine-tuning has occurred. One explanation of this would be, well, look, we're in this infinite, perhaps infinite, sequence of expansions and contractions. They'll each be different from the other, so the fact that we find one particular set of features here isn't a reason to say anything further about what needs to be explained and what doesn't. With that as background, we can turn and look at the readings for the teleological argument and talk more specifically about the textual material that we're using for this study.